So today I'm going to finish this series that we started the first of the year on the 7 deadly sins. And as I have shared multiple times during this series, I feel like this is an important study because the 7 deadly sins are all by nature sins of the heart. And as I have shared with you again many times during this series, I feel like being alert to our heart is important because we truly are not right with God until we are right with God in our heart. I'm not a Christian because of doing a few Christian things every now and then. I'm not a Christian because I read my Bible. I'm not a Christian because I was baptized. I'm not a Christian because I pray. I'm not a Christian because I go to church. What makes me right with God is when I am right with God in my heart. And, as I've shared multiple times through this series, the best and most accurate measuring stick of really that indicates my true standing before God, again, is not my outward actions, but am I really right with God in my heart? Do I have a love relationship with God in my heart? Do I truly want to live for Him and serve Him from my heart? And so what we've looked at with these 7 deadly sins are various impediments or infections that get into our heart that block our relationship with God. We've looked at greed and gluttony and sloth and envy and wrath and lust. And today, the last of the 7 deadly sins is not an insignificant one, but it's the sin of pride. And when I mentioned this one, goodness, this is something that I've talked a lot about over the years that I've been a pastor here at this church. It's something that I've had to learn about myself and never written a book, but if I ever write a book, the first book will be on the subject of pride because I think this is a really, really important area of struggle in our lives that we just don't oftentimes see. And so I'd like to start off today with kind of a little bit of a quiz, kind of like a pride and humility quiz. And I want to ask a question. Who do you think would make a better partner, spouse, or friend? And I want to show you pictures of pride and humility and you tell me, what do you think is better? Would you rather have as a partner, spouse, or friend somebody who's an arrogant, condescending know-it-all or someone who respects and appreciates your opinions? I mean, this isn't rocket science. This is not really hard. This is the right answer. Or would you rather have someone as a partner, spouse, or friend, one who talks about themselves most of the time, or somebody who's just interested in you and your concerns? Would you rather be around somebody who brags about their talents and accomplishments or someone who brags about your talents and accomplishments? I mean, which would you prefer? Would you prefer one who arrogantly refuses to admit their mistakes? They don't think they ever mess up. Or someone who's quick to humbly confess their mistakes? I fouled up. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Would you rather be with one who believes they deserve to be served by others and kind of have this entitlement concept? Or would you rather have as a partner, spouse, or friend one who loves to graciously, generously serve others? Would you rather have as your partner, spouse, or friend an arrogant self-promoter or one who unselfishly lifts and encourages other people? I think this is a no-brainer. This is easy. I would choose every day, all day, somebody who looks like this person, a picture of humility over, the prideful, the more arrogant, prideful type of person. I think that virtually all of us would prefer a humble, considerate person with a servant's heart than a selfish, arrogant snob any day of the week. But having said that, I think it's interesting that when you look back down through the corridors of time, It's not the way human beings have always thought or felt. Humility has not always been viewed as a great value. In fact, in the ancient Greco-Roman world, 300, 400 years before Jesus, all the way through the time of Jesus, what's interesting is that humility is not always seen as a virtue. We feel that way because we've been influenced by the teachings of Jesus. But the word associated with humility was a word frequently associated with being crushed or debased. Humility was more closely associated with humiliation in the ancient world. They did not always like virtue or humility as a virtue. Here's something I found. There's a writing called the Delphic Canon. It's a listing of 147 maxims, pithy maxims, considered by the ancient Greeks to be the sum and substance of the ethical life. In those 147 maxims of the Delphic Canon, there is no mention of the theme of, let alone the word humility. I think it's fascinating. Instead, they liked philotimia, which is the love of honor. Aristotle had insisted that honor and reputation among the pleasantest things that one could contemplate and attain for oneself. This is kind of how they used to reason in the ancient world. When you did something good, you earned merit. And merit demands honor. In other words, you ought to be recognized for it. Honor was the proof that you'd done something meritorious, something of value. So if you avoid honoring somebody, that is diminishing the merit or the good. And to the ancient people, that was shameful. And so what you saw in the ancient world, many of them, leaders, rulers, winners in life, they compiled and created for themselves what I call brag statements. They've even found these on the houses of people. Living in this home is somebody who's done this, and this. But to honor yourself, to brag about yourself, was viewed as a good thing in the ancient world. Now today we'd kind of say, man, what an arrogant ignoramus, we might say. But back in those days, they felt like this was good. And so it's into a world that wanted to be honored and loved to even honor themselves walks the Savior, the Messiah, Jesus, who says the greatest among you will be not the one who promotes himself, but the one who serves others, who washes their feet. For all who exalt themselves, they'll be humbled. But those who humble themselves will be exalted. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. What's fascinating is that Jesus walks into a world in which honor is like the highest value, and honoring yourself is viewed as a good thing. And he says, no, I want to change that, In Jesus' teaching ministry over and over and over again, he elevates humility and he condemns or discourages pride. It's really interesting. Now, you see this in many of his teachings. One of his more obvious and forthright teaching about this is in a parable that he taught in Luke chapter 18. And he tells kind of a story about a time when two men went up to the Jewish temple to pray. One of them was a Pharisee. This is viewed as the good guy. He's a spiritual decathlete. He's a guy who does all kinds of good things for God. In Jesus' day, the Pharisees were honored. But also a man who went to the temple that day was a tax collector. And good Jews in that day, when Jesus would have said a tax collector, they would have boo, hiss, what a bad guy. They were viewed as traitors because they collaborated with the Roman government and taxed many times unfairly their people. So he starts with the prayer of the Pharisee. And he says the Pharisee stood by himself and he prayed. Look at the content of his prayer. God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. Robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get. I mean, this guy's prayer in many ways is a bragging session. This guy's prayer is not really a prayer. It's pride disguised as a prayer. There's no humility here in his statement. There's no humility before God. It's just bragging about what he's done. I came across something the other day that I thought was interesting. It was a statement that was made by a European central bank president on Facebook about himself. This was 2 or 3 years ago that he did this. He says, I was humbled to be awarded an honorary degree by the London School of Economics earlier this week. Thank you so much for this prestigious honor. And he uses the word humbled. I was humbled. Is putting a statement like this on Facebook an act of humility? And I would suggest to you that's not an act of humility, but it's false. It's fake humility. It's humble brag. It's self-promotion in the disguise of humility. I would say a statement like that in many ways is a function of pride. See, what this Pharisee was doing was not prayer. It was humble brag, self-promotion. Look at me. Look at what I've done. Look what I've accomplished. Now, Jesus goes on in the parable and he talks about the tax collector in his prayer in the temple. He said, but the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast. This is an expression of angst and anxiety and unworthiness and sadness of his own sin. He beats his breast and he says, God, just have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. Have mercy on me. I come before you not with anything to brag about. I just need your forgiveness and your mercy. And then to wrap up this parable, Jesus makes this statement. He said, I tell you that this man, referring to the tax collector, which would have been a flip in what's really righteous in Jesus' day. He turns righteousness upside down. He says, I tell you, this man, the tax collector, went home justified before God and not the other, not the Pharisee. Again, over and over and over again in Jesus' teaching ministry, he elevates humility and he condemns pride. About 1600 years ago, the great theologian Augustine said this about pride. He said, pride is the foundation of sin. And this is why. Pride makes the soul desert God. In other words, pride leads us to think that God's not the source of life. I am. What I'm doing. Look at me. When I self-promote, look at my accomplishments. That's pride. And it makes us think we don't need God. That's what's so deadly about pride. I love this quote by Tim Keller, regarding pride. He says, pride is the carbon monoxide of sin. It silently and slowly kills you without you even knowing. This is what makes pride dangerous. This is one of the primary problems with pride, is that it's sneaky. It gets in you. It infects you. And we don't even see it. Now, I've talked about this a lot in sermons and Bible studies in the past. In fact, I've shown this diagram many times to our church, that I feel that pride has 3 components or 3 stages to it. In that very first stage, kind of talking like what Tim Keller was mentioning here, what makes pride dangerous or deadly to our souls is that it leads us to believe things about ourselves that are just not true. I get this inaccurate and hyper-inflated view of myself. So I think I'm stronger than what I really am, or I'm smarter than what I really am, or that I'm better than what I really am, or that I'm safer than what I really am, that I'm more righteous, more talented, more important than the truth of the matter. I think I'm hot stuff. And then when I think I'm hot stuff, then I think I don't need others. I look down my nose at them, maybe even in a condescending way. I look down my nose at others. When I feel like I'm hot stuff, I don't need church. I don't need to go to Bible studies. Maybe I don't even need God, because I'm good enough by myself. This is what pride does to us. We have this, I'm better than what I really am. And because of that, I don't need others. And then the ugliest aspects of pride is when I begin to look down my nose at other people. You see, the self-righteous Pharisee in Jesus' parable, he knew he was right with God. Yeah, look at all the stuff I've done. But Jesus' point is, no, he was not right with God. He was actually far from God. In the book of Revelation, chapter 3, in chapters 3 and 4, Jesus has a series of conversations with churches in the ancient Near East, in modern day Turkey. And he has comments about them and confrontations toward them. And in the lukewarm church was the church in Laodicea. And he says this about them. You say, I'm rich, I've acquired wealth and do not need a thing. Look what I've got. Look what I'm self-sufficient. Look at all the wealth that I have. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. Again, this is the danger of pride. Pride is a tricky sin because it operates under the radar, And so, because I'm not aware of how it's infected me, then it starts to gum up my life and even sometimes my relationships. This is what pride does. Pride keeps me from saying, I'm sorry when I'm wrong. When I'm full of pride, all I can see is your mistakes. And so if I'm confronted about a wrong, I'm not going to apologize. I'm going to, but what did you do? Look at you. Look what you're doing. Pride keeps us from admitting sin in our lives, like porn addictions or gambling addictions or shopping addictions or substance abuse addictions that are secretly destroying our lives and those entrusted to us. This is what makes pride dangerous, because I don't see my own problems. I won't admit things about myself that are wrong. And this causes problems. It causes problems. I mean, you look in the sports world. I don't know how many times I've seen really, really, really good teams in various sports get beat by teams with less talent because they overlook them, because they underestimate their opponent and they overestimate their own ability to play at a lower level and still win. I don't need to work as hard. I don't need to try as hard. And then the team gets beat. I read some research recently. This was done some time ago, but I saw the research recently that says that men drown twice as often as women in the water and swimming. And what the research says, that's at least partly because men tend to overestimate their abilities as swimmers, and especially when they're drunk. And what do they call that when you're drunk? Liquid courage. I can do anything. I can do this. The danger of pride is that it makes us think we're stronger, smarter, better, more righteous, safer than what we really are. Now, here's the thing that I think is also important to notice in thinking about pride and humility. Pride is not the only thing that blinds us to the true nature of our souls. And some of you have seen this diagram. I've shown this before in Bible studies and sermons. But the problem with pride and arrogance is that we think too highly of ourselves. But I want to also say that low self-esteem is similar to pride, and although on the opposite end of the continuum, because with low self-esteem, we tend to think too lowly of ourselves. With pride and arrogance, we have an inaccurate, elevated view of ourselves. With low self-esteem, I have an inaccurate, but in this case, in this instance, a self-deprecating view of myself. Pride and arrogance puffs me up. And so, because I think I'm hot stuff, I do stupid things. I do things stupidly, foolishly, thinking that I can do this when I really can't. But with low self-esteem, it deflates me. And it makes me not even want to try things because I think I'm a worm. I'm unworthy. I'm not good enough. God could never bless me or use me. You see, these are two sides of a continuum where humility is kind of the sweet spot. The value and the beauty of humility is that it is an expression of an appropriate view of myself, an accurate and an honest view of myself, where I can gain a true picture of both my strengths in life, but also my weaknesses. This is where I'm good. This is what I can do. But boy, over here, I've got some struggles, and I can be honest about the fact that I'm inadequate in some of these areas as well. See, both pride and arrogance and low self-esteem are sinful because they have an inaccurate view, either too high or too low, where the beauty and the value of humility is that it's that sweet spot that we want to find in our lives where we can be honest and see the good, and we can also see the struggles that we still yet need to work on in our lives. Let me give you a few quotes that I found some time ago that I think are really of value on this subject. John Stott wrote, "At every stage of our Christian development and in every sphere of our Christian discipleship, pride is our greatest enemy, and humility is our greatest friend." God, help me to be humble, to be honest, and to be humble, not full of myself. C.S. Lewis, "As long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people. And of course, as long as you're looking down, you cannot see something that is above you." D.L. Moody, "God sends no one away empty, except those who are full of themselves, full of pride." God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble, the Bible says. Peter Kreeft wrote, "If we come to God with empty hands, he will fill them. If we come with full hands, he finds no place to put himself." It is our beggary, our receptivity, that is our hope. Let me close with a kind of a series of questions. We'll call it kind of a pride diagnostic that I'd like for you to think about yourself and think about your life and your relationship to pride and humility and to people around you. For example, do you look down on those who are less educated, less affluent, less refined, and less stressful or successful than yourself? Do you always look down on people? Can't relate to people like that. You don't want to be around people. Do you think of yourself as more spiritual than others in our church or in maybe your church? Are you quick to find fault with others and to verbalize those thoughts? You can always see what's wrong with other people and you feel like you need to tell them about it. Are you proud of the schedule you keep and how disciplined you are and how much you're able to accomplish? Are you driven to receive approval, praise, and acceptance from others? Do you generally think your way is the right way, the best way, and maybe the only way? Are you guilty of pretense, trying to leave a better impression of yourself than is really true? Would the people at church be shocked if they knew what you were like at home? Do you have a hard time admitting, in fact, that you're wrong when you are wrong? Do you have a hard time confessing your sin to God and others? Do you talk about yourself too much? Then look at this last one. Are you sitting there thinking of how many of these questions apply to someone you know, feeling pretty good that none of these things really apply to you? Those are other people's problems. I'm going to say if you're an honest and earnest person, at least one of those questions probably punched you right where it needs to. In closing, from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, this great statement by the Apostle Peter. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, that he may lift you up. Lord, I pray today that you'll take this last sermon in this series, very basic sermon, but yet I think a really important one for our Christian experience, and use it to cleanse us, to wash us, to help us, to change us, Lord. The problem with pride is that it gets in me and I can't always see it. It operates under the radar. I pray, Lord, today that you'll help me see those aspects of my life where pride is hurting me, holding me back. I pray that you'll place within my heart a new humility, a genuine humility that honors you and honors other people and lifts them up as we live a life of praise. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.